American President Donald Trump has called Nicolas Maduro's court appearance extraordinary. The Venezuelan leader described himself as a prisoner of war.
Yes, this all happened at a court appearance in New York, where Maduro pleaded not guilty to drug trafficking and narco-terrorism. And he still insisted that he is Venezuela's president.
Well, he and his wife were taken from their Caracas home in a dramatic special forces operation ordered by Trump.
Well, meanwhile, the Prime Minister says he stands with Denmark. It's after Washington suggested that the US should annex Greenland.
Earlier, former Trump advisor Jason Miller insisted on The Late Show Live that the US wouldn't invade.
No, I think what this is the mainstream media trying to distract away from the fact that President Trump brought to justice a narco-terrorist in Nicolas Maduro, and that he's going to actually restore democracy to the people of Venezuela. And so the whole thing on the Greenland front, I mean, Greenland should be a territory area that's controlled by the United States. I think the U.S. could do a much better job of maximizing that area, especially with those shipping lanes opening up and the Russians and the Chinese pushing their military into the Arctic Circle in that part of the world. But no, there's not going to be an invasion of Greenland. That's just a silly distraction.
Well, joining us now is Deputy Editor for The Spectator, Freddie Gray. Very good morning to you, Freddie. And should we start with that dramatic and defiant court appearance by Maduro in New York yesterday? What did you make of it?
Well, it was dramatic and it was defiant. And he obviously, having recovered from the shock of being arrested, has gone into a kind of charismatic mode, which he does have. He's a charismatic human being, as he's shown over the last decade. But I think to all the sort of Labour MPs and various other figures who are starting to see him as a victim, I think they should be a bit careful. He is a very, very evil and dangerous man in many ways. And I think over the next few weeks, the extent of his corruption and brutality and links to very dangerous groups will become clear. So I think, you know, this sort of Maduro innocent campaign, I think, is going to reach its limits pretty quickly.
And big questions as well, Freddie, on what happens next. Question marks over Cuba, Colombia and Greenland. What do you make of those comments just then from Jason Miller, the former Trump advisor, saying that the US would not invade Greenland?
Well, I think it's probably the right line for him to take. I do think it's a little bit odd to hear Trump advisors saying this is a distraction, because it's Donald Trump who's talking about it. And it's Donald Trump who's providing the distraction in that case. I think it's also worth saying that Trump started 2025 by talking about annexing Greenland. I think he does like to start the year by kind of scrambling the news agenda in many different ways. So, yes, it is a distraction in many ways. I don't think there's a serious plan to annex Greenland. I think America has long held this position, not necessarily out of the mouth of the president, but in national security circles, that for the future it's very important that America controls Greenland because of the Arctic and the threats from Russia and so on. But I don't think there's any serious plan to do it anytime imminently or militarily. And a lot of people in Washington have said for a long time, why don't we try and buy it from Denmark, make Denmark a serious offer. I can't see any military action. I think Trump was just talking off his mouth, and so you can't call it a distraction if Trump's saying it. But it's nonetheless not the main story. The main story is what's going on in Venezuela and what is happening in Latin America, what might happen next in Latin America more broadly. And I think that's the really interesting question.
What is the main story? I mean, we've been given stories. We talked about Venezuela and drugs and various incursions and migrants into America and whatever it is. But it's not about that. It's about Russia, and it's about China, and it's about oil supplies, and it's about markets for Russian oil, for instance.
Yes, well, it's about the great power struggle. And the changing world order in which America and China increasingly assert themselves in different ways, and Russia is asserting itself in different ways too. So the main story is about the irrelevance of the United Nations. But in many ways, that's been true for a long time. That's not necessarily a true story. You know, when America captured Noriega in 1989, the UN condemned the invasion there. So this happens periodically. The US will take an action, the UN will complain, people will warble about international law, and then everybody moves on. I think the main story here, though, is about Latin America and America inserting itself in Latin America. And I think what will be interesting in the next few weeks is to see what happens next in places like Cuba, Colombia, Mexico, Nicaragua. Is America going to assert itself in those states as well to control what it calls state cartel terrorism? That is the interesting question, because there's a lot of people in the State Department who really think they should.
Freddie, is it too early to say? Can you even predict what you think might happen in Cuba and Colombia and those other states?
I think there'll be a lot of pressure on those regimes to fold. Whether there'll be a military strike is a different question. I think particularly Mexico is a very fiddly and interesting one, because Trump has a good relationship with the new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, or at least he has a dialogue with her, whereas with the previous president, they had a very bad relationship and he was very anti-American. But the State Department and the Trump administration are clear that there are politicians that they want to see removed or arrested who have been involved with cartel activity. And they don't feel that Mexico's done enough to control that or to stop that or to hand over those politicians. So there will be pressure brought to bear on these states, and they will say to these states, look what happened to Maduro. Do you want that to happen to you? Otherwise, you need to comply with what we want, which is an end to what they call cartel state terrorism, which is a sort of link between left-wing governments in America and the kind of drugs trade, which it can sound a bit neocon and hysterical when people start talking about that, but it is also true that there are very corrupt regimes in Latin America that are linked to drug cartels that are funneling large amounts of drugs into America.
Well, that's the thought for the day. Freddie Gray, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it.
This interruption is brought to you by ExpressVPN and their New Year deal. New Year, new VPN. And a huge saving of up to 80% if you act now. You're busy planning how to get in shape, but the hackers are planning how to get into your accounts. ExpressVPN locks down your connection so you can start the year protecting your data. This offer ends on the 7th of January, so scan the QR code or click the link in the description now.
Now, we're going to talk about efforts to modernise the health service, which is a big thing for the Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who I'm delighted to say joins us now this morning. And you have a lot of announcements to make on this front, Health Secretary, and I think prioritising things particularly like menopause and recognising this is a condition and that you're going to take it seriously, and you're going to, give people the ear of the health service over this.
Yeah, good morning, Eamon. Yes, today we're announcing the next stage in the development of NHS Online, which was announced by the Prime Minister in the autumn at our Labour Party conference, and is designed to make sure that people get faster access to specialist care and advice much earlier than they would otherwise do, by connecting people for 9 conditions where it's clinically safe and appropriate to do so, to connect to someone, connect people online to a specialist in that area who can then speed up access to treatment. So you mentioned gynecology. We've got some terrible gynae waits in this country, and it might be that if you've got something like menopause or endometriosis and you are going through real challenge, your GP hasn't been able to resolve the problem, decides you need to see a specialist, NHS Online will give you the choice of being able to connect to a specialist where there's capacity in any part of the country in the way that you wouldn't be able to do normally face-to-face. And that specialist will then be able to look at your case, review your symptoms, and then decide on the next steps of care. For some people, that might be diagnostic tests and scans, a local community diagnostic centre or hospital. For others, it might be a prescription that pops up on the app.
That's a great idea. Nobody objecting to that. But why is this any different than seeing a clinical professional in person?
Well, because it will be faster. So we know that waiting lists for particular specialties can be worse in some parts of the country than others, and patterns ebb and flow. So if you can get access to a specialist faster online, then you might be able to do face-to-face. That can speed up access to the tests and scans or the treatment or the prescriptions that you might require depending on your condition. And the great thing about this is that for anyone watching who's thinking, well, that is not what I want, I'm not going to see someone online, what on earth is he talking about? Well, the good news is this is entirely through patient choice. If you don't want to see someone online, you're certainly not going to be made to. But the good news is, let's say, for example, I've got blurry vision, could be cataracts, could be all sorts of things. If I've opted to see a specialist via NHS online and I was in front of you in the queue for access to a specialist at one of our local hospitals, I've got out of your way, so you're being seen faster. So everyone wins from this, and crucially, and the central principle for me always, is about patient choice.
Mr. Streeting, our top story today is, of course, on Venezuela. Is the government supportive of US military action in Venezuela on Saturday? And are you confident that it was in line with international law?
Well, this is a fast-moving situation, and I don't have anything to add this morning to what the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have already said. I appreciate that there are many people, including many of my own colleagues, who are making strident criticisms of the United States action. What the Prime Minister is doing and the Foreign Secretary is doing is weighing up what they say, how they say it, and when they say it, because this is a delicate moment, and what the Prime Minister's considerations are is, first and foremost, UK interests and national security. Secondly, how do we make sure the people of Venezuela get the government they actually voted for, and the people of Venezuela get to choose their future, not anyone else? And thirdly, how do we make sure that we are upholding European defence and security, including our own national security, at a time when the rules-based order has been disintegrating before our eyes? And let's be clear about this. A world without rules is a world in which we are all less safe. The UK supports the rules-based international system. We have seen it creaking at the seams, and now we see it disintegrating. It is our responsibility collectively to rebuild the rules-based international system, because a world in which countries are abiding by the same rules and working with each other is a world in which we are all safer. But we are a far cry from where we have been, sadly, since the Second World War, in terms of upholding that rules-based international system.
And in terms of Greenland, we've heard President Trump talking about the US needing Greenland from a perspective of national security, wanting to defend it from the likes of China and Russia. Prime Minister speaking yesterday saying he stands behind Denmark, he stands behind Greenland, but not going so far as to criticise Trump. Will he be speaking to him privately about this?
No doubt the Prime Minister will be speaking to President Trump in the coming days. They do speak regularly, and the Prime Minister always seeks to use that influence to best effect both for the UK's national interests, for the interests of the people of Ukraine and their fight against Russian barbarism and imperialism, and also to make sure that we're leveraging that relationship in the interest of our continental security as well. We are very clear about Greenland. It is for the people of Greenland to determine their own future. They've been very clear about where they stand. They are part of the Kingdom of Denmark. They are part of the NATO alliance. There is no question about Greenland's future as far as the UK is concerned. And Greenland plays its part as part of the NATO alliance and as part of the Kingdom of Denmark in our collective security. So we already have Greenland on our team. Denmark plays its part in our collective security in the NATO alliance, including protecting the security of this country. And the Prime Minister has been very clear about where we stand.
OK. Wes Streeting, thank you very much for your time today on a busy day. So we appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting.